I'm David Cristello. I'm the founder and CEO of Jetpack Workflow. It's a software as a service application. It helps accounting firms track all of their recurring deadlines and due dates so that nothing falls through the cracks. And then I am also an advisor in a tool called Raft.io, so RAAFT.io, which is intelligent cancellation form software. So if you need to retain more customers or get better product feedback when somebody's canceling, you can use their plug and play tool.
Do you use Raft in your existing product?
That's how I found out about Raft. So we were looking, we had an individual, we had this belief, this philosophy that that you have to email somebody because that's where you get the insights. If it was done automatically, you're not going to learn, you're not going to get these insights. And we never revisited that belief. And it got to the point we had somebody spending 10 hours a week doing this and we weren't getting any insight. So we went on the hunt for, a cancellation form software. I don't even know what to call it. Even with Raft, I'm like, what category is this? And so we ended up becoming customers at Raft. I thought it was a really cool tool. Got on the call with the founder, really connected, strong product team. I thought it was a really amazing single point solution. And it was a tool for software companies and SaaS founders. And I love that community. So I thought it would be a lot of fun to come on board and help them out with some acquisition and distribution efforts.
That sounds great. And we're probably going to explore that later. But for now, can you actually let us know roughly your team size? How many employees do you have? And since when you've been working on Jetpack Workflow?
Yeah, so we're based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Team size, including, a part-time contractor is 20, full-time we're 19. And we got incorporated in January 2014. And then I went full-time on the business in summer 2015, and we made our first hires Q1 2016. So, in some ways 5 years, and then in other ways we've only been a company that has something called a payroll for about 3.
Cool. So it's probably going to be a very broad question, but did you have any key learnings or tips in growing from 0 to 20?
Oh, employees? Oh, goodness. Yes. There's so, oh my God. Yeah, there is, it's really interesting that, so early on, you start the company because you want at least for me, you want a sandbox. You want a place where you can explore and play and learn and get in the weeds, and it's a lot of fun. So your first couple hires, you're like, they want to be autonomous, they want to get in the weeds, they want to explore, they want to learn, they want to go, 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 go. And then you almost want the some, take on a different attribute as you grow. So somebody that's clearly they want autonomy, but maybe they're not as entrepreneurial. So you don't want 15 people all kind of running in their own little passion projects, which is kind of the antithesis of a founder, which they always want to run into their passion project. So one of the learnings is, the kind of early hires, they're amazing, but it's slightly different than the next set of hires. And so there's a cultural adjustment as you start, doing things like project planning, which we're still evolving and going through. Man, learnings on the team. There's a million. I don't know. I could probably just riff off, big and small, setting metrics, setting performance reviews, doing project planning, getting, right now we just finished our first management team. So we have a functional leader for every part of the business. And as soon as we got that together, so the final steps were hiring somebody to lead sales and somebody to lead marketing. And now the challenge is how do I get that team aligned, right? Where, so there's all kinds of communication breakdowns. As you hit 10 people, I remember feeling a huge whirlwind at 10 people. And it just felt like everything was harder to communicate and people were on slightly different pages. And, now we've have a management team with functional leaders. In some ways, it's freed up a lot of my time because I don't have to do sales, marketing, and ops. But on the flip side, I have a much bigger communication hurdle and burden because there's 6 people that all need to be running in the same way, and then that gets cascaded down to their team. So we're not overly optimized from an organizational standpoint. We're relatively flat, but even with our structure, I mean, communication's a really big challenge. and giving insights onto what everybody's working on is a huge challenge. So yeah, there's a million. Hiring has been a challenge. We can go into hiring. You know, it, any which way you take
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
right?
okay. We're gonna go there. So, just to recap, there is 6 people on your management team.
Yeah. So we have somebody that heads up product, somebody for engineering, somebody for operations. So operations for us is finance, HR, and a little bit of like client service, as we call them in some way. We have success, sales, and marketing. So I think that's six.
Marketing. Got it. And you mentioned that communication is a very big challenge. What's your mean of communication at the moment? You guys are all co-located, right?
Yeah, except we do have one developer in Brazil, but other than that, we're all co-located
This is
in
only for the
Pittsburgh,
team
Pennsylvania.
retreat to be able to go in Brazil.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I wish that was the reason. Yeah. So I'm actually in the process of ripping apart our company communication and changing the cadences and channels and styles in which we communicate. Historically, we've done weekly one-on-ones, bi-weekly team meetings, and then every functional team has their communication cadence. So the engineering team has a daily stand-up, 10 minutes, what you do yesterday, what are you working on today, where are you blocked? And they actually do it to their credit in under 10 minutes, which is awesome. Sales has their own cadence, post-sale has their own cadence, marketing and our ops are different. So I have a weekly check-in with ops to see what's going on with special projects, what's going on from a financial perspective. I have a weekly check-in with marketing to understand what I could be doing to assist with creatives or to understand how pipelines being developed. And then one of the things we're experimenting with which is a sales marketing touch base on Monday about the messages going out this week, promos going out this week, trainings going out this week. But I think there's still optimizations, right? We just went to a monthly team meeting, and we're starting to infuse more um, team member presentations into those team meetings. So this is Google Analytics, and this is what it does. This is
Mhm.
code. Hey, everybody, this is what code looks like, and this is how software works. Hey, we're at a software company, and some of the things I'm thinking about now is how do we create a culture where we're talking more about our customer learnings and our accomplishments on a weekly basis. Maybe it's not a meeting, maybe it's a Slack celebration, but I think something that's been on my radar is every Saturday Sam Walton used to do this is what we learned this week, right? He went to all of his competitors and this is what we learned, and all the store managers, this is what we learned, and everybody gets to benefit from having that information distributed on those meetings. Maybe we'll do something like that Friday over lunch, and we'll get some pizzas and people can present on a customer they loved, some learning they had about the industry, and what they built and accomplished that week. Maybe it's the number of closes, maybe it's a new feature, and just a way to celebrate both the learnings and accomplishment. And it's my little hack. We haven't instituted yet. Hopefully, we'll do that by the time this is ready to go. But you know, if we didn't celebrate those wins, what happens is I have to send out an email, or the manager has to send out an email because sales doesn't know what engineering is working on unless the sales leader or myself sends an email. So it's a kind of a ground up way for everybody to communicate what they're working on, as well as also celebrate what they've learned or built in that week. So that's something I'm thinking about. Thinking about updating the one-on-one structures a little bit. Um, yeah, it's I actually have a couple hours booked this week to just think about communication cadences. So if anybody listening out there has some amazing ones that they feel gives them a great pulse and their team a great pulse, I'm all ears.
Hmm. What are some of the do and don'ts that you learned in terms of communication?
Uh, don't say something once, right? You might as well have not said it at all. There is. So I'll give a great example. We updated, and this is so small, but this stuff happens all the time in so many different ways. It's like we updated our time off policy. Give your manager 2 business days notice for every 1 business day you're taking off. There's been times, and look, this is still my fault. I'm not saying, oh, somebody wasn't paying attention. I probably said it 3 times. I did maybe 5 presentations to the company in a month, and I said it 3 times, and I kept reminding, and I was like, people must be sick of me saying this. And then 2 months later, somebody was like, why? I didn't know that was the policy, right? So like, so maybe team meeting is the only place. Maybe the managers need to reinforce it. I need to send out an email. it has to be said 7, 8 times. So I feel like every now and then I get that lesson, resurfaced, where maybe I don't always have to give the message, but somebody does, and it needs to be over and over and over and over again. I think something we have done well is I think you can walk around the office and everybody knows our values and everybody can speak to our values. In our team meeting, we'll talk about, somebody that was living out the values and highlight them, at the monthly team meeting. So I think that's been good. I think from a communication standpoint, we're learning on the go as we build this. I haven't built a SaaS company before, and we make mistakes, and I get the really glamorous job of standing up in front of everybody and said, hey, we made a mistake, right? We thought X was going to happen, Y was going to happen, and this is what we've learned. Or we made this shift, or we moved in this direction, and this is why. So we've done a lot of iterative communication. I think a benefit I've personally had is managers will come tell me, hey, my team said this was great. Hey, my team said this is the worst thing they've ever seen, whatever it may be. And I think that feedback has been really beneficial for communication purposes. The other thing is I probably don't use enough communication outside of maybe a team meeting or an email. I need to use all the above and just make it so super obvious and crystal clear, whatever I'm trying to communicate. One thing I didn't do in the past that I've started to do now is anytime I do a presentation in front of the team, I need to practice it. And it is so time consuming to practice a speech you're about to deliver, even if it's at 5 or 10 minutes. But you got to think of the compound effect for 19 people to not hear something clearly, and that creates such a mess organizationally. So something I've started to do, this just is a small hack, but I'll be taking a walk with my son. I'll open up my voice memo on my phone, just practice. And in about an hour, I can get through 3 or 4 times of the speech. And I never even go back and listen to them, but every time I keep practicing, I'm adjusting in my head, like that didn't make sense, that didn't make sense. So that's something I'm doing a lot more now, is I'm trying to say it out loud and hear the words and see how they're resonating with me and practicing them. That's not something I had to do at 5 people. At 5 people, it's like, look, heads down, get into marketing, get into sales, think about product. And now I'm like, I need to practice this speech, which is not really something I get, excited about, but it needs to be done, right, to deliver the message clearly.
That's pretty cool. I mean, yeah, the more important the message is, the more you want to practice it. Is there other thing
Yeah,
that
I'm
you discovered you had to do as you were growing in terms of communication?
Oh man, goodness. Yeah. And as a side note, like, tomorrow we've had an existential an existential a directional dilemma where, we go through this process, and I'm sure, everybody's kind of familiar. Set a big, hairy, audacious goal, then set a 3 year instead of 1 year. Where early on, it was like, there is no 1 year. It's next week, and next week is grow, 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 grow,
That's
grow.
right.
And then all of a sudden you're like, where are we going next year? And, being the optimistic founder I am, we're like, oh, we're going to 10x our, growth. I never matched the growth plans to the reality of the business. I was always like, let's, and going through that process of trying to marry reality with my optimism has been a very humbling curve. And, getting the 3 year together and the 10 year together. And, tomorrow, talking with the other managers about, our single focus, what we want to be the best at over the next 10 years. And, I spent at least 2 hours practicing, a 10 to 15 minute presentation, right? And there is going to be Q&A, but if I don't get that right and they're 4% off, then their team's going to be 25% off, right? So I have to spend a lot of time thinking about the words I use and how I use them, and how I carry myself throughout the organization. There's no, I should not show up looking tired or beat up ever, right? Um, that's just not the appropriate message, I think, to convey at any time. Um, but the other thing we had to clean up, and we're still cleaning up, which is like, okay, we have a 1 year plan. What does that mean in growth? And let's break that down to functional. And what are the functional targets? And why do we believe in these functional targets based off of history? And so that's a new process for us, because I was, owning so many functional parts of the business that I was able to heavily influence through sheer will sales, marketing. When I oversaw finance, right? And now with other people running them, and we have a thing called a budget that we're trying to adhere to, then it drives a lot more discipline in trying to plan appropriately. And that planning process is really important to get all the other managers on the same page because, for example, if we say, oh, we want to double our business next year. Okay, well, how many trials is that, and how many trials need to convert? What's the ARPU of those trials, and what's the churn rate we're going to assume? And are all those numbers believable on our historic growth rate? If the answer is no, okay, then what new investments are we going to make to drive that growth? And why are we confident those new investments are going to work out, whether it's a new product or a new service or new distribution channel? And we never really had that level of conversation as a management team because we never broke down the functional metrics to the place where we're at right now. So it's always hard to really harness everybody's brain power because we didn't have great data at the time. So communication wise, that's been a challenge of like I remember going into this year and trying to plan it, and we're kind of spinning out because we really didn't have great data, and so we're like, well, I don't know. So what's the project? Go out and get good data? Okay, but just doing that's not going to help you grow, right? Like, woohoo, we have data. Great, we didn't grow, right? Could be hiring somebody. Well, but, depending on that person, they're not going to come in and immediately spark growth. It's kind of people need time to get set up and get onboarded. So communicating the gaps in our growth, communicating the gaps in our product, and trying to fill that in, that's been a challenge. So that's something we're working on as well. So I think that's a couple examples. I'm sure there's more.
Oh, that's good ones. You mentioned briefly, how you looked at the metrics and how you actually got the data in order to figure out what your long-term goals are. How long did that actually take then to get all those data? I mean, did you put like 6 months on the site in order to start getting all those things in place, or how did that actually go?
Yeah, and we're still not done. I mean, there's tooling. We're still in the process of getting set up, but you know, excuse me, this is another thing where let's say implementing something like Salesforce. We need better sales data, right? Okay, well, we need a CRM and we need to use that CRM. So to pick a CRM might take a couple weeks because you want to evaluate and you want to see which one's the best fit. And you want to ask around.
That's the easy part, yeah.
That's the easy part. And then to implement it, so we came from Pipedrive into Salesforce to get set up to implement to import the data took, I don't know, a couple weeks. I have no idea. I don't remember. Then to set up Salesforce was another time period, and then training the team on Salesforce another time period, and then we have to wait for the data to actually get in that tool for us to get actionable insights. So yeah, it could be 6, 7, 8 months before we're like, okay, we're starting to see some really interesting things, inside of this platform. And that's what's really challenging about scaling in some sense is that there's like this is the thing you need to do, but it's going to take 8 or 9 months to really see it play itself out. So what are you going to do in the meantime to grow in those 8 or 9 months? Because you can't just say we're going to grow because we're using Salesforce or whatever or this tool, but you absolutely need it to get the data. But you can't make good decisions in the short term because you have no data. So you're just going to go by shoot from the hip, which is sometimes okay, sometimes not okay. So yeah, it could take a couple months to get it set up, and then another couple months to get the right information. So it's a time intensive process. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it does to some extent. What would you actually do different if you come back and then redo it? Like, let's say you're on a different company and then you have to do pretty much the same thing. What would you do differently?
Yeah, it's funny. The director of customer success and I kind of joke about this sometimes. We're like, imagine doing this again. How much time is going to be saved, right? Because if we did it again, I'm not going vendor shopping, assuming it's relatively soon, right?
That's right.
I'm like, I know this tool. We love this tool. It really worked well for us. When we were looking at Salesforce, there wasn't a pure sales leader at the time. I was a sales leader. I'm okay at selling, but I didn't know much about sales management. So we're like, well, what should we do? Opportunity? Should we do leads? If we do opportunity, and when should a lead turn into an opportunity? How long should it stay an opportunity? What are the stages we should track in that opportunity? So we just spent a lot of time in like solution design. Whereas if you do it again, you're like, look, we're just going to run it like this. and we can always iterate on it, but I at least know that this has worked, in prior instances. And this is where, and Pittsburgh's great, right? And I think every, kind of non-major city could kind of similar, say something similar. But if you haven't done it before and you don't have people on your team that have done it before, you just spend a ridiculous amount of time like going through blog posts, trying to figure it out. And you have no idea the validity of these blog posts in some instances. So you're like, that seems to be right, but is this right for our business? Because we're so outbound or inbound or enterprise or partnership driven. We're kind of a bit different. You just spend so much time trying to find best practices. So yeah, doing it again, it's like, here's the tool, here's the setup. I know roughly how long it should take. I know the investment. If I was doing it again, I would probably think about um, bringing in more tenured, more senior people early, and then having them build out the teams. The way I looked at it initially, and part of it was contingent on the financing you receive. But, for example, I wanted to hire, what you would call like an individual contributor, because, it's like, look, we need more sales. Let's get a salesperson. They can come in right away and start working demos. Sales manager, well, we don't really have many people to manage, so we'll kind of wait on that. I think I'd be curious to see how it'd play out, and it could be worse if we got more of a player coach early on, and they would build out the functional area, hiring the team
Mm-hmm.
almost from the start, where I think I held on to things too long. And then it was detrimental once I did the handoff that the system wasn't as strong as it needed to be. And we had to, like right now for, certain areas of the business, handed it off to somebody and then they look under the hood. Like the surface looks great and they look under the hood and they're like, oh my gosh,
Mm-hmm.
this is a mess and this is dirty and there's so much debt here and they have to clean it out. And that was because I waited too long probably to hire for that role.
Yeah, how did you manage the transition from, holding all those key areas to actually just making it full-time CEO?
Yeah, but I've only been full-time CEO for like 2 months,
Wow.
which is um, an interesting challenge because as soon as I got done hiring the managers, all the functional leaders or managers, there's then the problem of how do you get them all aligned. So I immediately went into that challenge and that opportunity. Um, I what my one of my big learnings with hiring leaders is, I mean, this is just a lesson for myself. I don't know if it applies to other people. I had to hire sequentially. I tried to hire two senior roles at the same time, and I ended up indexing heavy into one and kind of not as much into the other, and it just wasted a bunch of bandwidth and effort trying to hire both at the same time. And part of that's contingent on maybe the process wasn't as tight as it needed to be. I probably could have leaned on a virtual assistant a little bit, further. But I mean, when I go out and try to recruit a senior leader, I am never just sitting back and hoping job boards bring in leads. I go into recruiter mode and I go into LinkedIn and I try to use the founder title to my advantage and say things like, hey Chuck, I'm the founder and CEO of Jetpack Workflow. Um, we're looking at getting more ingrained in the sales ecosystem in Pittsburgh. I'm really curious in your background. Would you have 10 minutes to chat? About some upcoming roles and opportunities we have. And so I would do one-to-one email, LinkedIn messages, get on a call, get into lunch, get into breakfast, try to get referrals, try to build the pipeline. And to do that for two, as well as, at that time managing sales and marketing and taking on other projects, it was impossible. So I tried to do that last year for, VP of sales and a VP of operations. And what happens is like, I feel like I ran the VP of operations pipeline pretty well. And then the sales one is kind of all over the place. And I look back at the pipeline management of last year and I was like, goodness gracious, I was all over the place. I should have hired sequentially. So when we set up for hires this year, I started with marketing and then I went to sales. And as soon as marketing, as soon as she signed like the agreement, the next day I posted the opening for sales. It's like great, but then I had the dual challenge of onboarding an entire function into one person. There's no real marketing team outside of one person, as well as trying to hire for, the VP of sales. So, but I just got burned when I was trying to hire both at the same time. They just didn't work out well.
Got it. Just coming back a little bit, when did the metrics made sense? Is that after you hired, one of those big management role or before? So did you try to get the metrics before hiring or the other way around?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent before, and then I just figured, at the end of the day, I want somebody to come in and, drive the metrics that they feel are great leading indicators and then actual performance indicators of what they've done. So, for sales, we had a little bit, right? We had basic
Hmm.
close rate.
Of
For
course.
marketing, we had basic channel, you know, what a channel is bringing in for free trials, um, and even operations and some of the finance, right? We would run P&Ls, but were we really thinking about every line item and trying to optimize spend? No, right? So yeah, so some surface level. I needed to, for better or for worse, I needed to know that the system was working, right? Okay, marketing is working, but it's hard to segment our effectiveness without having somebody think about it 24/7. So let's get somebody on marketing. I know sales is working. I know if we bring in leads and they talk with a salesperson, we have great conversion rates. I know that's working. So let's bring in somebody to fine tune it. Um, yeah, like I said, in hindsight, maybe I wouldn't do that, but that's how I did it with
Mhm.
with Jetpack workflow, and it's been pretty good.
Did you realize at some point that some metrics were actually wrong, like you were tracking the wrong metrics?
Oh yeah, let me think. Oh man, yeah, that's a good question. The answer is yes. I'm just trying to think of some good ones that we were tracking, and we were like, what are we doing with this metric? Right? Because we would review it
Yeah,
every
sure.
week, every week, and we're like, what are we doing with this metric? And usually you can tell if a metric's worth tracking is if it goes down, you do something about it.
Ooh, that's a
Right?
good
There
one.
there right? Like there's existential metrics. Like we have a true north metric that we track on the usage of the app. And if it goes down, on a week to week basis, maybe not the end of the world. But if it's multiple weeks in a row, like, wow, we're really going to take a look at it and see if something dramatic has changed. But if you're looking at every week and it's gone and you're missing the number, if it's gone down, yeah, that's a great metric. If you're looking at every week and you're like, this week we had 150 support tickets and next week we had 120 or 200, we're like, okay, well, what was average response time and what was time to resolution? What's customer satisfaction? We don't really need to know the quantity of support tickets. Nice. I'm glad you know it. I don't need to know it, right? Like that might be a simplistic, example of that. But yeah, I can't think of one off the top of my head. I just know we definitely had some. I just can't recall them off the top of my head.
Okay, no worries. You mentioned briefly the true north metric. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and maybe how you came up to find your own one?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a great talk. I think it was a presentation at SaaStr, and one of our investors sent it over to us that you should be tracking if your customers are getting the value out of your application that they're paying for. And the premise is that if you do not track your true north metric, then you track all of your financial metrics that you can end up with a very, very leaky bucket. And so if you don't keep a gauge on both, that your business will eventually not only flatline, but start to decrease quite dramatically because you just can't artificially prime the growth engine. And so, examples, Greenhouse is an applicant tracking system, and their true north is how many hires were made using our tool. So I'm assuming if somebody gets to stage, hired yes or hired one or whatever it's called in there, they track that their people are buying this tool to make better hires or to make hires. Other ones might be, Dropbox or Box, amount of files uploaded in a certain time period, things like that. Um, for us, it's around, is the work getting done on time? Simply put, right? What percentage of work is getting done on time? That's why people are buying our tool. That's the value they're trying to get out of it. And, we track it and we try to optimize around it. It's a relatively new muscle for us to build. But I think it's very useful to use that as a decision making filter as we're thinking about what to take on. For quick mail, I don't know. I don't know if it's, emails opened or emails replied to or
Positive reply
deliverability,
rate. Mhm.
positive reply rate,
Yeah.
right? So that's really cool. And so, so A, the email has to be delivered. And then you have to build some sort of, kind of best practice templates to make sure it gets open to reply to in some kind of way. And the quality of the lead list has to be strong. So it's just as a very nice quality forcing function, for the company. And when I think about metrics, I always think about what's the quantity and quality balance, right? So for marketing, one of the things I've been talking about a lot internally is we have the quantity, how many free trials are in the app, and then the quality is like how many of those free trials, what's the ARR of our inbound pipeline. To me, that's the quality. How many of these are qualified prospects and what's their ARR? I guess for the company, your quantity metric is the pure financial metrics. What's your MRR, what's your ARR, whatever. And then the quality metric is the true north metric. Are people getting the real value out of the application? So it's just a good counterbalance.
Was it hard to find yours? Or did
Honestly,
it come naturally?
well, everything's hard. Right. Um, I would say relative to other things, it was actually easier than I anticipated. I think one of the big breakthroughs for us is we were really thinking about a true north metric as a product metric. We had read some literature. They're like, your product needs a true north metric. Your product needs a true north metric. Your product. We're like, what's a metric product can own for our true north metric? And I think it was in the talk or presentation where they said, no, it's the company's metric. The CEO's metric is the true north. We're like, okay. And so we sat in a room. We are like, why do people buy our tool? What are they looking to get? And we had some ideas. We're like, is it tasks completed? Is it the number of tasks? Is it how much they log in? It's like, well, nobody buys a tool to log in. Nobody buys a tool to log in. That's not the value. And just completing tasks for tasks, that's not the value. So it was actually one of the handful of times where we had a session for about an hour or 90 minutes, and then somebody said that was our VP of engineering. She said that, and we were like, yes, yep, that's it. Conversation's done. Thank you so much. So yeah, it was easier than I think we thought, but it was only after we thought of it as a company metric that really unlocked more space to think about the metric.
How did you go about communicating that to everyone so they are aligned? Did you actually reinforce that every meeting, or how did
Yes.
you do
So
that?
this is yeah, so this is the actual hard thing. Getting the metric is easy. Getting everybody aligned around it and getting our decision making process around it has been the hard thing. So we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it every week. And we have something called a level 10 meeting, which is a EOS, type of meeting. And it's a way to just look at your metrics and talk about company issues with the leadership or management team every week. So we'll look at that metric every week. I don't think we've done a good job at infusing that throughout the rest of the company. And there's going to be some changes this year on how we do that. And for example, not only should it be a filtering mechanism for us to make our decisions on what projects we take on or what we explore, but we should have, like, quite frankly, like monitors in our office to tell us how we're doing on this core metric. It's actually really cool if we're able to get aligned around, how much work is getting done on time, year to date, company start to now. It gets everybody thinking about that metric and everybody thinking about, who's the right customer and how should they be communicated with and how should they be serviced and what kind of product experience to deliver this outcome. But I'll tell you right now, I don't think we do a great job of communicating it. So that's on my hit list of things is, how do we bring that more front and center, and how do we make that metric come alive a lot more?
That's fair enough. Always more room for improvement. What's you mentioned EOS briefly. Can you say exactly what it is and what you're doing with it?
Yeah, I mean, so the premise is every company has a its own operating system, how it runs meetings and how it plans and how it leads the company, and of course by extension the management team. And so whether you have one that you've agreed upon or not, everybody has their pulses and the way they plan and the way they manage. And so Traction is a prescriptive operating system. So it will tell you, here's how you set your 10-year, 3-year company values. Here's how you set up your target market and your competitive advantages. Here's how you break down goals and get everybody aligned on goals. here's how to document your core processes. Here's how to set up what they call an accountability chart, which is their take on an org chart. And it really just looks at what are the key components to running a high performance company. And it's their operating system to do that. There's others out there that, called Scaling Up, or the Rockefeller Habits by Vern Harnish. That's an example of another operating system. There's a book called Business Execution for Results, or something like that. They all essentially say the same thing. So the good news is that if you do pretty much any one of them, you're directionally going to go in the right place, seemingly. We just went forward with Traction because it seemed like they did the best job at making it simple to digest and use in your company. Scaling Up, they have some frameworks and exercises that are amazing, but they seem to be probably to a higher degree of sophistication than we need right now, right? We just need to walk, maybe do a light jog. Scaling Up is like full on sprinting, and I mean you're going deep into some of these strategic questions. It's like, no, we're not there yet. So let's get our core values, let's get our purpose, let's get aligned on our niche, let's get aligned on our 3-year, our 10-year, where we're going. Let's get aligned on who owns what and what they should be taking on. Let's get aligned on the metrics we're managing and what they mean. Let's get aligned on how we plan. These are pretty baseline things, and Traction did the best job at just making it really simple to do that. Although it's simple doesn't mean easy, of course, but they give you a simple set of tools.
How
Yeah, it
instru-
gets.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say. I mean, it's been a rather painful process to implement it, but it's we're starting to see the root take shape, and I'm really excited about it. But we did not hire an implementer, and implementing these systems, it is like you're operating on yourself. So if you get a room of 5, 6, 8 people, whoever's on your management team, and you try to do it yourself, it's absolutely doable. But one of you is going to have to facilitate, and it creates an odd environment to try and do that. So it's been a stretch process for us, but I think it is absolutely necessary. There's no way we can continue to operate without getting one of these systems in place. And again, because I've never built a company before, it just felt super obvious to me to put one of these systems in place.
How long did that take, this
Oh, we're
transition?
still in the middle. So yeah, I mean, honestly, probably from the moment where it's like, hey, we should build a functional V1 of our management team, to we're all aligned, we have great processes, we feel really good about the direction of the company, we're all on the same page. That journey is not done, and I bet from start to finish, 12 to 18 months.
Oh, that's a big
Long.
investment of time. Was that instrumental to your success, or a byproduct? What would you say?
Well, we try to implement it earlier this year, and we had some fundamental execution flaws in how we try to go about doing it earlier this year. Um, Part of me was like, we should have just hired a implementer, but then that's probably grass is greener on the other side, right? Because we're going through the exercises now, and some of the prescriptive things they say in the book we're not doing, and we're like, I can't imagine, by doing it with our angle on it, it's, I think, yielding really really great results. And if we had an implementer, I think their goal is to get something done, even if it's not directionally right. Hey, we're going to do 1-day session. You're going to answer all these questions, and boom, 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 and we're done. But you need to chew on stuff. You need to battle it out. You need to debate it, and some of the timelines they'd represent is probably not realistic. If this is something you're really going to be chewing on for 10 years and for 3 years, you want to really work on it and refine it. But I will say, it's, if anything, our lack of getting the system up and running in a more timely manner has absolutely slowed us down from a growth perspective. Absolutely, because we're on slightly different pages. Everybody's 3 to 10% in a different direction. So, this is a very great time for an interview, Jeremy, because we're in the middle of making a really big transition as a company. So when you run this summit next year, you interview me, and I'm just like kicking back, and I say, yeah, it's. But right now it's a big transition. Hiring the team, getting them aligned, getting an operating system together for the company. It's been a huge transition.
How do you drive the other people in the team to go behind this vision and all those changes of the EOS?
Yeah. Oh goodness. So this is probably one of the communication learnings or one of these Zen moments, which is, you know, so I did a presentation on EOS, why we should be using EOS, what it does, it's the outcome. I think early on, we've always had kind of at a management level, either a democratic or consensus driven approach, which honestly wasn't all that bad when there's, three or four people in a room. It's pretty easy. When you start getting 5, 6, 7 people in a room, it becomes chaotic for whatever reason. And it's really slowed down our ability to implement something like traction. So what we did differently this time, which is like, okay, we're done talking about it. At the end of the day, all these directions will get us to our desired outcome, whether it's scaling up, whether it's homegrown, whether it's traction. I'm most comfortable with traction, so we're going to set the sail with traction. And instead of, this was actually something our VP of Ops recommended, instead of doing a big group 1-day session, let's create working groups of 3 people, scouts, to go out and answer certain parts of it. And it's been so much faster to split people into kind of these pods and then report back, on them. But I think one of the hardest things I've yet to really crack this code. It's easy to communicate something when everybody knows it's broken, right? When everybody feels the pain, it's like, well, yeah, of course we need to do something better. What I need to figure out how to crack is, there's been times in my life where I'm like, hey, I see the pain. It's like 6 months from now. And how do I communicate the urgency and importance for that? That's there's been times in my life I've done it well, and there's been times I haven't done it well. I would say EOS, that was one of the times where I'm like, this feels like it's going to get painful in 6 months. We should probably start doing it now. And then kind of spun out and didn't go anywhere, and I dropped the ball on it. And then 6 months later, people are like, man, this is painful. This is painful. Why aren't we doing this? And I'm like, I know, right? Oh man. So yeah, I think and something we're trying to do a better job of internally is, who owns this decision? Get the input you need on the decision, then make the decision, right? So we did that. Product. I have all kinds of opinions on features, right? I'm one of the stakeholders, right? That it should do this and it should do this and do that. Well, who owns the decision, right? It's our director of product. So I'm going to give you all the input I need. And I'm going to tell you all the reasons I believe it, and then you get to go off and you get to decide. For something like EOS, saying like, look, I own the decision, but I want to hear everybody's input about what they're concerned about, and then I'll make the decision. So I think that muscle is just something we're continuing to try and put into every meeting, into every decision, right? At the start, just to let everybody know, you know, John owns this decision, Sarah owns this decision, but the goal of today is to get feedback, and then they'll go off and make the decision. And yeah, it wasn't always clear, and that leads to slow decision making process if you're unclear who actually owns it.
Got it. I got a couple of questions about that. When do you think is the best time to start implementing those EOS framework and operating system?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest with you. I've heard you can start at about 500K a year. I would say either 500K a year, or probably if you're at 10 people, probably one of those two variable. I just remember getting to 10 people, which I was really excited about. Hey, we have 10 people. This is great. We have this milestone. We passed 1,000 firms. We got 10 people. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And then like everything just felt like mud for like a couple of weeks, and I'm like, huh? This doesn't make any sense. And for people listening, you've gotten past whatever it could. Maybe it's 12 for other companies or 15, but I just remember being like, that's weird. Why does it feel harder at 10 than it did at 5? And that's why I think we could have started implementing EOS at 10 people.
Can you give some example of that of problems that EOS actually solved for you specifically?
Yeah. So here's a great example. So we were going through the accountability chart last week, and putting everything out there. And one thing that we're like, well, who manages expansions? What unit should expansions sit under? Right? Because we kind of mapped it out. We have sales, we have account management. So should expansion go under account management, or should it go under the sales team? Now, our customer success person could manage it even if it's under sales, but we just need to know where this thing sits. We had never talked about it. And it was kind of in this amorphous, like sometimes sales wanted to do some stuff in there and sometimes, account management, customer success wanted to do in there, but because they're each respectful and they don't want to step on each other's toes, sometimes it just sat there, right?
Got it.
Um, that was a great example. There's another one, which is like, well, we have Salesforce and we have somebody that's, a Salesforce expert internally. And then we have somebody that manages IT, which is actually our VP of engineering, and IT sits under ops, and she's over here. But then we have somebody that manages our CRM. So when do you loop in the person that manages the CRM? When do you loop in somebody that does IT? And then who owns, you know, this structure around large system implementation? Now, CRM's kind of easy. If you need something from the CRM, go to this person. If you need something outside of it, go to this person. But there's been times where we'll do an outbound email campaign where like, well, there is some IT, if we're trying to integrate a new tool, but then we also have Salesforce. But who owns this project, right? So like this goes back to like who's making the decisions on this project, and if it's unclear, then it just goes really slow. The big thing that we found out last week was there's this role in EOS called integrator, which is typically like a COO, and that integrator typically manages the managers, and they like to say keeps the trains running on time, so day-to-day pulse. And then they have this title called visionary, which is typically the founder CEO role. And what we found is that half the time I'm in the integrator role, and the other half of the time our VP of operations is in that integrator role. And this has led to our managers sometimes going to him for something and other times going for me. And there's been many times, not many times, there's been a handful of times they'll go to him and he'll be like, oh, I don't know, ask David. And it's kind of like we've become like this quasi like set of parents, which is like, I don't
Yeah,
know, ask
mommy
mom.
and
Don't,
daddy. Yeah,
oh wait,
exactly.
ask dad. And
That
it's just
said
great.
yes.
Yeah, some version of that's literally happened. And so it's like, okay, should I be in the integrator role? No. Lee should. But does Lee have capacity to manage both operations and sit in that role? Probably not. So how do we create a plan? But it was even just the realization that the other managers were feeling like, who do I talk to?
Mm-mm-mm.
And listing that out, I think was interesting. We actually had a yellow post-it note of like, who owns this? We had about 10 topics that we were talking about. Pricing strategy. Who owns pricing strategy? Product, operations, right? Where does it go? Could go either one. When did operations for us? Um, there's other. I just can't recall the other ones off the top of my head, but there's a handful of things of like, who owns this? It wasn't that hard to decide. We just never decided it, and it's created this like, again, slowness in making a decision because there's no real owner. So when we want to update our pricing, we now know who the owner is.
Got it.
So, anyways, EOS has helped with that. Like I mentioned, we had this existential question about we could go down two paths over the next 10 years. And, I always in some ways felt clear about it, but I wasn't not able to communicate, hey, this is we're going 10 years, this is we're going 3 years, this is we're going 1 year. And their vision traction organizer paired with our little working session pod of three people, I think made it so we have a simpler set of tools and statements that we can bring to the rest of the company, so everybody knows without a shadow of a doubt what we're working on and what we're trying to build. Which I don't know, has always been the case, or objectively, people have told me that's not the case. So that's the reality.
All right. I'd like to shift gear a little bit. At the beginning of the talk, you mentioned also your involvement in another tool called Raft. And my question to it will be, you're actually not the first CEO that I hear that, while running their company, they're also investing in smaller businesses around. What actually prompted that? And what time do you think there's a good time for doing it, a bad time for doing it? Would you recommend it to other CEOs, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I'll answer, I guess, in reverse order. I don't know if I'd recommend it yet, right? I just don't know. It's
Yeah.
very early. I don't know. The reason I did it was because I we were customers of the tool, and I just thought thought it was a fascinating tool. So I reached out to the founder, and we connected, and they had a lot of questions about it. It's a very strong product team, engineering and design and product management, um, which is part of my weakest skill sets. So I'm like, well, that's cool. And then they had issues around positioning and messaging and marketing and selling. And I'm like, I love that stuff. So you have a strong product team who has a deficiency in something that I could contribute to. And it's a tool that not only do we use, but it serves a community of SaaS entrepreneurs and founders, which is obviously where I live and where I sit. And so it kind of hit some of the check boxes. And the way I looked at it was, you know, I really think the tool makes so much sense for every SaaS company or subscription company to implement. But at the end of the day, I get to peek into a different product process and work with really strong product people and see how they function and work and think. And for me, that's probably the big benefit. I think there's obviously going to be a financial benefit to it as well, but that's what I'm really interested in. Like how do they operate from a product perspective, and what do they think about and how do they think about it and how do they manage contractors or teams or think about UX and design. So I thought it to be a good learning opportunity in a market that I've never marketed to, even though I live in it. Really. So it's been interesting. It's been a good learning. I forget how hard it is to kickstart growth. It really is like rolling a mountain, a boulder up the mountain, right? It's
Yeah, we
like,
got those pink glasses that once we done it, it's just like,
oh
yeah, it wasn't
man,
that hard.
dude, it is so hard. And the other thing too is they're bootstrapped, right? So I raise money, they're bootstrapped. So I'm like, that's also kind of interesting to see how that plays out. And to get early growth is really, really, really hard. And it's been a good reminder that without capital and without a lot of resources, both from time perspective, if we had somebody looking at acquisition 24/7, obviously we'd be in a much different place. Or if we had a lot of cash to throw on acquisition channels, we'd be in a much different place. So it's been an interesting challenge of like with minimal time, minimal effort, minimal capital, how do we build and get the product to market? And the reason I came on too is like I honestly believe it's the best cancellation form software out there. So I'm like, okay, you have the best product here. It's a new category. Be really interesting to learn and see how this unfolds. So, anyways, I some weeks I'm like, this is a brilliant idea. It's really rejuvenating to get on calls where the problems are ones you've interacted with before. And I love startups. I love SaaS. I love businesses. And so it really re-energizes me to connect with that team and hear about their challenges. But then on the flip side, I'm like, my current role requires 290% of my time right now. So, is it the right was it the right time to take on? I don't know. We'll find out.
It's a bit like getting a baby. There's never a right time for doing it, right?
Yeah, honestly, if you're ambitious and you love to drive fast, there's probably never a right time. Because I just can't imagine Jetpack ever getting to the place where I'm like, man, I'm just so bored. I feel like there's nothing to do here, right? I feel like there's always going to be time to figure out new ways to innovate and grow quickly. So, I will say that, for about 6 months, I was like casually looking at either companies to invest or advise. And, I have like zero capacity to do any more advising. And so, I have one and that's it. And I have Jetpack and that's it. And I'm maxed out at that point. So there's no more I could take on. And then from an investment standpoint, I'm actually investing more into Jetpack. I'm buying some early shares of Jetpack. So I'm out from an investment standpoint. So I'm just totally maxed out, aside, I guess, from interviews like this.
Understood. Okay, so I think we're gonna wrap things up. Can you let us know some of the books that's been very instrumental to your personal growth and your company's success?
Wow. So I would say from a marketing standpoint, so I kind of, cut my teeth in direct response marketing. So I think things by Dan Kennedy, the Dan Kennedy No BS newsletter, Dan Kennedy Ultimate Sales Letter were very informative books. John Carlton's Kick-Ass Guide to Copywriting Secrets or whatever, John Carlton is a big influence there. So that's on the marketing front. I'm thinking, from the business world, I have a recency bias of sorts, but I mean, traction and scaling up for where we're at right now as a business is hugely influential to me. I read those books 18 months ago or 2 years ago. I'm like, this is cute, and I just went on and did something else. But now is the absolute time to go all in on scaling up and the Rockefeller habits and best business decisions and good to great and traction and all those types of books are
There are
becoming.
two tractions, right? Which one are you talking about? The one from?
I'm talking about the one by Gino Wickman,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah, great clarifying question. And I've read Traction now, and I continue to reread it to make sure we're implementing it in the right way. I'm trying to think about early on, other influences. So this is a resource you told me about, manager tools, which I know now
Yeah.
as a book called The Effective Manager. So that was very influential at the time. And I don't know, probably 900 other books, but those are the ones that come to mind.
All right. Awesome. If people want to know more about Jetpack Workflow or yourself or get in touch with you, what should they do?
Yeah, it's jetpackworkflow.com. If you know accounting firm owners that are struggling to get organized to see all their deadlines, the interesting thing about Jetpack is we don't serve the software community. We serve accountants, right? So, anyways, if you know of any accountants, point them to jetpackworkflow.com. If you're interested in Raft, if you want to retain customers, get better product feedback with cancel form software, that's raaft.io. And outside of that, if you want to get a hold of me, just leave a message in intercom on Jetpack Workflow, right? I don't know.
Smart.
Right, right. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Um, shoot me an email. I don't know. And if I know we talked a lot about, pretty abstract topic, which is communication and trying to get managers aligned. So if that resonated with anybody, super curious if that did. I'm going to do something. I can't promise a response. I'm not super great with email, but it's just my first name, David at jetpackworkflow.com. And just leave a message there. I would love to hear if this content's been valuable or resonated with you in any way. Or if you listen to something and you're like, oh, this resource could really help them out, shoot me a note. Would love to hear that resource.
There you go. Well, David, thank you so much.
Yep, thank you.